Thank you very much. Thank you so much for your testimony. It was very informative. And we've heard today of the massive figures of improper unemployment payments, many fraudulent, which could be as high as $400 billion, some of which could have been prevented if we had put in the proper guardrails in place, particularly in the last 1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan that the Democrats jammed through. My home state of New York, unfortunately, but not surprisingly, ranks near the top of the list with an estimated $11 billion in fraudulent unemployment payments, payments alone. These taxpayer dollars went to fraudsters, many who are from overseas, as far away as China and Russia and Nigeria, who bought luxury cars, condos, watches, designer goods. As you could see, I made a nice graph here because we haven't talked about that today. It's shocking to my constituents when we tell them that this pandemic relief money shamefully went to purchase 18-karat Rolex watches, luxury condominiums, Louis Vuitton, and other designer goods, a $10 million villa in the Dominican Republic, $3.5 million mansion in New Jersey, chartered jet services, luxury vehicles from Porsches to Mercedes-Benz to Ferraris to Bentleys. One person even received $1.5 million over a span in 10 months. This is absolutely unacceptable, and I'm glad to hear today that there's bipartisan support to crack down on this, and we must do what we can to recoup this money. But to make matters worse, my district offices in Staten Island and Brooklyn worked with dozens of constituents who have had their identities stolen and could not get the unemployment benefits that they desperately needed. Because the Department of Labor in New York failed to prevent fraud at the outset of the pandemic, the Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund was drained, and for the last 2 years, the state has had an outstanding loan to the tune of $8 billion from the federal government. My colleague mentioned this earlier. I'm concerned that New York small business is going to be left holding the bag. And my question, if you can clarify, if New York continues to fail to repay its federal advance due to its failure to limit this fraud, will their per worker tax keep increasing year after year, and by how much?
I can provide an answer for the record for it, but I would say offhand that's up to the state to decide how to repay the money. Now, some of the pandemic money was available for states to use to repay their money that they owed to the unemployment insurance program. So I even think there's money, in the coronavirus relief fund that was given $350 billion to the states. I believe, don't hold me precisely to this, but if my memory serves me right, some of that money could be used to help repay the program. So it depends on the decisions made by the governors and the state legislatures on how to repay that money.
Well, that's a good point, and it's about $100 billion that is unspent in COVID relief funds, so perhaps the federal government can take action there. Which states did it right? Okay, New York obviously did it wrong. My colleague talked about his state of Utah, that they had good preventive measures in place. What states, Mr. Horowitz, do you think are model states that we should be looking at on how to prevent this type of fraud?
What we've seen are evolving actions by the states over the last several years. And so what I want to do is get back to you on sort of which ones perhaps are leading the effort. There are several, though, as part of the National Association of State Workforce Agencies that have come together to, for example, implement identity verification tools that have been very important, because you mentioned identity theft. We at the PRAC often talk about identity theft creating three victims. There's the public at large, because it's the public's program that gets the money stolen from. There's obviously the person whose identity is stolen, who has credit issues, other issues they've got to deal with. But then there's the person, as you mentioned, who is the intended beneficiary. And we've heard testimony about individuals, as you said, who went to get benefits, whether it's from unemployment insurance or other programs, and were turned down because the agencies thought they were the fraudsters.
No,
the
I appreciate
fraudster
that.
beat them there.
And I want to, just 20 seconds left on that point, Mr. Dorado, your testimony notes that of October 2022, there have been 41 states using the identity verification service that provides new data sets to conduct enhanced unemployment claimant identity verification, as was discussed here, and contains cross-matching with Social Security, the Death Master file, to identify the use of deceased persons. Can you please talk about that? Why are and should all states be using this service, number one? And do we have an estimate of how many dead people received unemployment benefits?
I don't know if Mr. Horowitz knows that or Mr. Turner, but I don't have the estimate for the total number. But I do know that it's an appropriate cross-match to make. You know, one of the easiest targets for fraudsters is to get a Social Security number from a deceased individual. A lot of this information, as Mr. Turner mentioned earlier, is on the dark web, and they can do that. I know my own mother received, she passed away, unfortunately, right before the pandemic, so she received an economic incentive payment from the Treasury Department. Now, my sister returned it because she called me and said, what to do? I said, send it back. So, you know, Treasury, this is a problem with the federal government, too. Treasury sent $1.4 billion to an estimated 1.2 deceased individuals in economic incentive programs. Now, due to our recommendation, I got about half of that back, so about $700 million. Right now, the Treasury Department Fiscal Service is not allowed to use the Social Security full death master file to check before they make a federal payment. Now, that's something I've been trying to get for years. Congress finally passed it. It's due to take effect next year around this time, but I think it should be expedited and made permanent on a basis. I mean, there's no reason that we should be doing this.
Yes, if I could add, on that, the deaf, Social Security numbers of deaf individuals, we do have that available. I don't have it broken down for me right now, but we can provide that to you at a later time, after the
Thank you. I'm sure everyone on the committee would like to know that.
Yes, we can
answer
provide that.
Thank you.
And we will, you know, work to get that data. But I would say, just picking up on Mr. Dodara's comment, on our fraud alert we just released, when we matched PPP and EIDL information with the Social Security Administration, we have several thousand deceased individuals who got PPP and EIDL loans. Our job now is we're trying to figure out if they were alive at the time of application. Our guess is some were. Our guess is many weren't, because we've seen this problem, and it makes no sense why you would want the Social Security Administration to have a death master file index and yet let other parts of the federal government pay out billions of dollars in benefits to individuals who are deceased.
Thank you, Representative.